at all. Whereas your argument that people who have white skin have privilege, it's bullshit, because you can't say that every person on the planet has fucking, every white person on the planet has privilege.
I don't have to prove that every white person has privilege, because that is not what white privilege means. As I have stated in my previous video, I have no idea what shit you have been smoking that has convinced you that repeating the same dumbass assertion is a rebuttal to my argument. My argument is not that people with white skin have privilege, which is absurd in of itself, because some blacks have white skin. White is a social group in this context. Your basic premise is wrong. The argument is that white people, as a group in the US, are less likely to come across certain experiences than blacks as a group. This does not ignore the within-group diversity. This does not ignore the whites who suffer due to class, gender, even though you MRAs ignore gender issues among women, status, sexual orientation, attractiveness, and even random chance. In the words of Emirbayer and Desmond 2010,
as sociologists of the Chicago School, most notably Zorbug, 1929, not to mention historians studying the emergence of racial categories, e.g., Gossett 1965, see also Hannaford 1996, have observed, we cannot hope to understand the dynamics of the social world by apprehending racial groups merely as individual cases with semi-autonomous histories and lifestyles. The true object of analysis is the space of interracial conflict itself. To repudiate race and ethnicity and nationality under the derogatory label of groupism is, in my view, to engage in a form of sociological colorblindness that undermines the possibility of collective action. Racial, ethnic or national identities are thereby reduced to quite subjective processes. How one, or many, interpret their social location, their differences or similarities with others, and so on. This has the consequence of diminishing the political dimensions of these themes, as well as relegating lived experience, not to mention world historical events and widely distributed beliefs, to little more than commonly held illusions.
if I were to take your logic seriously, we would not be able to make any true statements about any social groups. The statement that African Americans consume a lot of sodium or experience a lot of heart disease would be racist statements. The statement that Asian Americans have a high college enrollment rate would be racist. Your logic is blatantly idiotic.
That's why it's racist.
It would be racist, if that's what it is. If you want to criticize a concept, at least try to understand what it means.
You're generalizing about an entire group of people based on their fucking skin color, but we'll get more into that in a bit because you talk a little bit more about that later on in the video, which is quite interesting.
Vindicator. Generalizations are a necessary thing, a thing that is not always racist. They are used to summarize information about groups. Secondly, not all generalizations are meant to be applied to every member of a group. Also, you seem to think that it's okay to make general statements about a group, just as long as you clarify later that you only mean a subset of that group, or that it doesn't apply to every member of that group. If that logic applies to Devin, then it applies to me. The white privilege concept is a generalization, but only in the context of averages. When you make statements about averages or general tendencies, you are making statements, general statements, about a group that does not necessarily apply to every member of that group. Devin, on the other hand, isn't simply stating facts. His interpretation of the facts is the issue. Statements like African Americans experience a lot of heart disease will have to be proven by saying that every black person has a worse heart condition than every white person. If we adopt this idiotic logic, society would not function, and the social sciences will fall apart. Some general statements are bigoted and others aren't. A bad general statement would be that black people are criminals. A good general statement would be that black people commit a lot of crime on average. In statement 1, I made a statement that does not acknowledge the within-group diversity. In statement 2, it does. Furthermore, not all generalizations are equally bad, due to the way that different groups are seen and treated in society. And not all generalizations are equally offensive. Now, let's compare the various general statements made in this exchange, and let's see how they differ. What's the difference between my blanket statements about blacks being discriminated against and Devon's blanket statements about Islam and Muslims, and Devon's blanket statements about blacks? Muslims are not a single ethnic group. Muslims do not belong to a single sect, and Islam is not a single ideology, but a diverse set of ideologies. Ideologies that often contradict one another. Islam is not in of itself a cause of bad behavior. It requires an individual to choose what parts of the book to follow and how to interpret them. This assumes that their religious inspiration comes from the book and not clerks or societal ideas about the religion. The idea that blacks are discriminated against is not in itself an accusatory statement against the group, whereas the statement that black people are insanely more criminal than every other race of people is.
Please just mention that the black people are insanely more criminal than every other race of people.
He accuses Muslims of acts of violence and terrorism.
Yes, Paris, Marx, it's Islam. That's the one that has conspicuously not left its violent origins. You want some facts to back it up? Look at the goddamn terror lists. Look at the outbreaks of violence and mayhem across the globe, and it's always Muslims.
The statement that blacks are discriminated against does not mean that no other minority groups are discriminated against, nor does it imply that blacks are treated worse than any other minority group on the basis of race. Devon is not just making blanket statements. He is actively condemning groups with those blanket statements. And based on these generalizations, he advocates for racist policies like racial profiling.
You kind of disprove your own fucking argument.
How have I disproven my argument? This should be interesting.
As racism, you are exhibiting yet another double standard that the...
I'm not displaying a double standard. I'm merely highlighting the fucking difference between the two.
It's a double standard. You don't think Devon's blanket statements are racist because he later clarifies that it's not all black people, or that it's a subset of the black community. Again, my issue is not the blanket statements. Yet, when I do the same thing, I get accused of racism. You believe the concept of white privilege is racist, and push the concept of white guilt.
So-called social justice warriors are talking about. Yeah, so basically, Devon is a racist. And
you keep repeating it. Doesn't make it true. You have to provide evidence that he's a fucking racist, and you haven't done that.
You're right, I didn't initially.
I failed to see how you AIU fanboys fail to see this.
We fail to see it because it isn't fucking true. There's nothing there to see. He's not a fucking racist. The only thing that you can see is the fucking straw man, and you're running with that. We see the straw man argument that was constructed. That's why we see that he's not a racist, because he didn't initially say that all black people should stop committing fucking crime. He was talking about a tiny minority within the fucking black community, which got misrepresented by TJ as Atheist Roo saying all black people should stop committing crime.
The reason that I said I failed to see this is because you watch his dumb videos and still come to the conclusion that he isn't a racist, which shows how delusional and psychotic you guys are. There is no straw man here, Vindicator. The claim of racism is an accusation and not an argument. He is not called a racist because people think he says all black people commit crimes. It's his interpretation of the crime statistics he cites that is the issue. He was not talking just about how it's wrong for a specific subgroup of the black community to commit a lot of crime.
Go back, watch the original Drunken Peasant podcast. Watch it through. Then watch every fucking video that Atheist Roo made about them strawmanning him. But you won't, because you're dishonest.
What the hell does the Drunken Peasants have to do with your idiotic response to me and Kevin Logan.
It is completely obvious, and you guys just fabricate some of the wildest.
You're fucking kidding me. You're the one that's fabricating this, alright?
When I say fabricate, I am talking about the excuses you all give for his bigotry. One example of this is how you ruse outright deny that he isn't just talking about this to point out crime levels. He originally brought this up as a counter-argument to Glenn's claims about racially motivated mistreatment of blacks by the law enforcement. In short, he is rationalizing police brutality against black civilians, shifting the responsibility of solving this problem on them, blaming black civilians for the police brutality, and ignoring the factor that race plays and espousing idiotic solutions to the problem. He also argues in favor of racial profiling, as I've said earlier, which is prejudice, which is the very definition of racism. He has trivialized police brutality against blacks, while condemning the black rioters and playing down the white ones.
Way to take responsibility. This is black people in a fucked up city filled with black people doing criminal shit. Disgraceful, inexcusable criminal shit. This is drug dealers. I've seen The Wire. I know Omar is lurking around with his shotgun. I've seen World Star Hip Hop. Have you? Please. We're talking about gang bangers. We're talking about drug dealers. We're talking about a criminal culture. Can we acknowledge who is doing this? And can we acknowledge the total detachment from, if you have a police brutality issue to take, then go through the goddamn legal channels to pursue that. If there is a case there to be had, then do it legally and responsibly. You do not wreck and burn your city. This has happened time and time again in black communities, in low-class, impoverished communities. The LA riots. I was there. I lived through it. Now, what do the Young Turks, what could you possibly say? Could you acknowledge who is doing this and that it's to be frowned upon? That's the least you could say. These people should be arrested, thrown in jail, and have the book thrown at them. You do not set fire. You do not cause violence. You do not create chaos in the streets. So what could you do if you're a progressive in this situation? It's a bad story about black people. This doesn't sit well for Baltimore. You think Baltimore is on the top 100 cities in the United States to live in? The top 1,000? Not even close. Baltimore is like Detroit. It's a get the fuck out situation. Leave. You must leave. If you're white, oh, you better leave. If you're black and have any ability to leave, you better leave. That's what Baltimore is. And the pathetic whining excuse making and the bullshit racism pointed at white people, pointed out the establishment. All of it is weak-ass, race-baiting bullshit. An inability to take responsibility. Just completely cowardly. It just does not hold up. I'm sorry. So, if you're a progressive, what are you going to do? Let's take a look at the progressive agenda. Okay, so here's the story that we got. Black people rioting, burning shit down, causing violence, and looting. Okay. They're upset because some guy was killed accidentally. So during a black riot, let's do a segment of, well, white people riots. You know, when I Google search white people riots, it really didn't come up with much, but it did show me some like out of control sports celebrations for like baseball or football or hockey that sort of, you know, drunk people, they were excited, they took to the streets, and then there was some like burning and some shenanigans that followed, and then inevitably it would be over after that one night. So that sports-related celebrations with drunk people, that is what they came up with, and he's running with that. He's going to do a story. So in other words, black people acting like criminals in the streets, on TV. What do? I go into the past to find sports events where drunken fans got too wild after the sporting event. What is that? What have we done here? We've avoided the topic. We've switched the topic. We've created a false equivalence. This is just like the Muslims all over again. It's fucking just like the Muslims and their non-stop crusade to tar and feather Christians.
He uses the word nigger, made jokes about shooting ghetto blacks across the nation. He has said that black people are criminals. He makes jokes about black people being inferior, and he has trivialized the death of Freddie Gray and demonized him. He has argued in favor of stereotyping black protesters as criminals just because they belong to a group that commits a lot of crime on average.
Those people that I see there, they don't look like thugs to me for some reason. Weird how that works out.
Well, John, well, I love your little sarcastic voice there. The people in question look like hockey fans to me. And do you want to bet $1,000 none of those guys have criminal records? Now let's take a view at the Baltimore rioters, and let's talk about their criminal records. That's why we might call them thugs or criminals, because they are.
And he has made fun of Sink for his skin color. You all will either deny that this has happened, or you will come up with a bullshit rationalization for this behavior.
TJ fabricated a completely bullshit argument and then attributed it to Atheist Rue, an argument that he never made. That's called a straw man argument. And you're running with it, like I've said before. So if anybody has actually fabricated anything, it would be you, TJ, and Kevin Logan.
Maybe me and Kevin Logan. But the drunken peasants is once again irrelevant. I responded to you because you responded to Kevin Logan.
I wouldn't even say that. You, or the denial of his racism is...
How can we deny something that isn't fucking true?
Here's the thing though. It is true. You just can't see it because you are brainwashed. Or you just lack a conscience.
You're in denial yourself. You're projecting your own denial of your own flawed arguments onto us. That's what you're doing right now. And that's what a lot of social justice warriors like you do. You do a lot of projection.
Please explain to me how I am projecting my own arguments. Social justice warrior, or someone who just doesn't have their head up their ass?
so obvious, and it's pathetic. And later in the video, you made an attempt to discredit white privilege by putting a picture side by side of Dylan Roof being carried off on the left, and on the right, you have a picture of the black DC sniper who was arrested in a similar fashion. And, yeah, you're committing the same fallacy that, Jaclyn and, that Jaclyn made, which is a spotlight fallacy. I could be using that wrong, but the basic idea is that you are using a couple of examples to try to disprove a general phenomenon.
No. Okay, we're going to go and take a look at a clip from the original video. The specific part of the video that he's talking about right here.
Right, so the argument he's making there is, and it's a false equivalency argument, is that black people are treated differently to white people. The trouble with Kevin Logan's argument and Jaclyn Glenn's argument is they're basing that on a false equivalency, because they're using Dylan Roof and then they're using a picture of a black guy who resisted arrest. Dylan Roof did not resist arrest. That's why he was taken into custody in a peaceful, civil way. The black guy in the photograph resisted arrest, so the police were forced to wrestle him to the ground. Now, I'm going to put a picture on the screen now that kind of should have been shown in Jaclyn Glenn's video, which is a exact equivalency to Dylan Roof. It's a picture of the shooter in DC, the sniper, who killed 7 more people than Dylan Roof, who was arrested in exactly the same way as Dylan Roof, and the guy is black. So, you're just talking shit.
Okay, maybe you can explain to me how me pointing out the false equivalency between Eric Garner and Dylan Roof is a fallacy, and explain to me how me showing a picture that is a direct equivalency of Dylan Roof is dismissing the whole subject altogether, when I'm just dealing with Jaclyn Glenn's and Kevin Logan's specific argument in that instance? How is that a fallacy? Because I don't understand. And how am I making the same argument as them when it's quite evident I'm disproving their argument? It don't make any sense with that statement at all.
And then she talks about this image that was floated around, which is so ridiculously laughable. The cherry-picked image of the black guy, was a gardener, who got choked out and died, who said he couldn't breathe, who resisted arrest, and then there was this huge ordeal that this obese man died from the incident. There's a picture of that guy, and then a picture of this racist kid in Charleston being led away into custody. But because he wasn't being choked during the process, while he had his handcuffs on, mind you, that's somehow unfair. We need to dogpile and choke out this white guy as a revenge to keep it equal?
No, nobody's fucking saying that, you dumb cunt, alright? The point that is being made in images like that, is that whilst a black man who might be committing a much smaller crime is choked to fucking death or shot dead or whatever, a white guy who commits a fucking act of mass murder gets taken away peacefully. It's about the police's attitudes towards white and black people. Do you really not get that? Is that too difficult for your fucking pea brain, dipshit?
Right, so the argument he's making there is, and it's a false equivalency argument.
The point that is being made in images like that
is that black people are treated differently to white people. The trouble with Kevin Logan's argument and Jaclyn Glenn's argument is they're basing that on a false equivalency, because they're using Dylan Roof and then they're using a picture of a black guy who resisted arrest. Dylan Roof did not resist arrest. That's why he was taken into custody in a peaceful, civil way. The black guy in the photograph resisted arrest, so the police were forced to wrestle him to the ground. Now, I'm going to put a picture on the screen now that kind of should have been shown in Jaclyn Glenn's video, which is a exact equivalency to Dylan Roof. It's a picture of the shooter in DC, the sniper, who killed 7 more people than Dylan Roof, who was arrested in exactly the same way as Dylan Roof, and the guy is black. So, you know, you're just talking shit, and I hate it when these social justice warriors, they try and make out, white people, they really are bad against black people. And I hate it when these social justice warriors, they try and make out, white people, they really are bad against black people. And I'm not arguing that there are certain elements within America that really don't like black people. I'm not denying that. That's blatantly obvious. But it's not an epidemic like Jaclyn Glenn and other people seem to be making out that it is. But it's not an epidemic like Jaclyn Glenn and other people seem to be making out that it is. So I'm going to take a look at something else now, because I'm getting sick and tired of this argument of white privilege like Jaclyn Glenn is trying to make in the video, and you're backing with your defense of Kevin Logan.
This is the part of the video that I am actually responding to. The fallacy is not pointing out a false equivalence. Kevin has said that the point in images like that is to display the police's attitudes towards white and black people. This is a general statement. You responded with the straw man of him basing his arguments on that, and you tried to disprove this general statement by pointing to the arrest of the DC sniper. When it comes to my statement about you trying to disprove white privilege, I will agree with you on that one. That is false. Though I do find it weird that you would call her attempts at proving systematic discrimination by the police as an attempt to prove white privilege. You are framing this as an attempt to prove white privilege, and I am simply responding to your attempt to discredit the idea in this video. You are making the same fallacy because you responded to her fallacious argument with the same fallacious argument. You use this to prove that discrimination by the police force isn't an epidemic, when it clearly is.
It can be used to prove or disprove white privilege, which is an issue, which is why this technique was doomed to fail in the first place, which is why I rely on empirical evidence to support the idea that blacks are discriminated against systematically.
You're saying there's a systematic discrimination against blacks. Then how come you have a black president? If that was true, you wouldn't have a black president. I'm sorry, that's just a fact.
Oh wait, he wasn't joking.
We have a black president because he is an exception to the rule. Exceptions do not disprove general trends. I can use the same argument to disprove systematic sexism in some Muslim countries. The example that I'm going to use is the recently deceased Prime Minister of Pakistan. Her name is Benazir Bhutto, and she served 2 terms as the head of state in Pakistan from 1988 through 1990 and 1992 through 1996. Does the fact that she managed to get into one of the highest, if not the highest position of power in Pakistan somehow prove that there is no systematic sexism in Pakistan outside of a legal context? This is why this argument is not taken seriously. She, like Obama, is an exception, and her gaining power does not mean that sexism in Pakistan is not systematic. Please explain to me how this would disprove systemic discrimination. I am going to link you to an article on sociology.about.com on systematic racism and what it means in a sociological context. In a sociological context, it is just a collection of anti-black practices, ideas, stereotypes, and inequality. Nowhere in this article does it list an inability to sometimes gain power as a requirement for systematic racism. Now, I will read a little bit of this article, just to give you a little perspective. In this article, systematic racism is a sociological theory developed by Joe R. Fegan, and it is used in sociological circles to understand how racism functions in the United States and around the world. Systematic racism in this article is defined as a complex array of anti-black practices, unjustly gained economic and political power, and other resource inequalities along racial lines, white racist ideologies, and attitudes created to maintain and rationalize white privilege and power. Systemic in this context means that racism is widespread and affects most aspects of the social landscape in the United States. Some key features of systematic racism in the U.S. are patterns of undeserved impoverishment and enrichment, vested group interests, the costs and burdens of racism, the role that white elites play in maintaining racist norms, and the rationalization of oppression. Furthermore, Obama is just one person, and the overwhelming majority of the positions of power are held by whites. You are committing the same fallacy. It is very odd that you believe that having 1 out of 44 presidents be mixed instead of white is somehow proof that systematic racism is no longer an issue. Obama has faced lots of racism for his achievements, and many people in the South tried to have their state succeed from the Union when he was elected. He has received death threats, and many have expressed their disgust at the idea of having him as a president because he is black.
Yes, it is an epidemic.
Then you need to prove that it's an epidemic, and you need to provide evidence, factual evidence, to prove that it's an epidemic.
My evidence is going to be linked down in the below bar. Please watch it so you know what I'm talking about.
Provide evidence.
My evidence is going to be linked down in the below bar.
I did provide evidence of it being an epidemic. I provided the evidence in the description of my earlier video and urged you twice to look at it. You admitted in my conversation with you that you watched at least the first lecture. So either you deliberately lied or you responded to me without reading my links. So you are just being dishonest at this point. But I will help you out and summarize a literature review by Deva Pager, since you seem to be lazy. In Deva Pager's article, she did an extensive review of the studies on discrimination. And throughout the literature, she found consistent evidence for systematic discrimination in employment, housing, credit markets, consumer markets, and as well as abundant evidence for forms of structural discrimination.
epidemic that needs to be dealt with. As I've stated before, not stated, but I've written and put it on the screen that my evidence is going to be linked down in the below bar. Please watch it so you know what I'm talking about. If that's not enough for you, I have plenty of other stuff that I can, cite for you. But it's a fact, whether you like it or not.
So when you say, black people, they get treated more roughly than white people, it's horseshit and it's racist, because you're generalising about an entire race of people. That's racism, my friend. And this is the kicker right here. These three police officers, they got away with killing somebody when the CCTV footage clearly shows them killing this person. So where was his white privilege? Where was that when he was lying, bleeding to death from his head on the floor? Where was his white privilege then? This is why this argument of white privilege makes me so fucking sick. It really does.
So basically, for the rest of this video, you focused your attention on white privilege. And you made the argument that the concept of white privilege is racist because it assumes that every white person is privileged to every black person. But that's not what white privilege is. It is basically a general set of, not general, but a specific set of experiences that blacks tend to experience more than white people on average.
If you can't prove without a doubt that all white people have this privilege, then it's not white privilege, is it? Because you're basing it on fucking skin colour. That's why it's racist.
Am I just supposed to ignore the fact that that is not what it means? I'm going to link you to another article from sociology.about.com, which discusses the idea of white privilege. In this article, it explicitly states that the phenomenon is about trends and not absolutes. Secondly, arguing that the concept of white privilege is racist because it contains the word white and privilege in its name is like arguing that feminism is not about gender equality because it contains the prefix femi. It's a completely pointless and stupid fucking point. Okay, so according to you, it's racist, and you gave the following reason. White privilege has to assume that every white person is privileged, even though you gave no good reasons other than the name of this idea to assume that this is the case. There is no connection between the premise and the conclusion.
So if you're now saying, well, it's not saying that it's about all white people, then it's not fucking white privilege then, is it? Fucking hell. Are you really that dumb? Are you seriously that dumb not to realise that by saying white privilege, you're saying it's about every fucking white person?
It's not about all white people. Therefore, it's not white guilt. This is the dumbass logic that you are putting forward. Yes, I am a dumbass for not disregarding general phenomenon because it doesn't apply in all cases. Next idiotic statement, please.
You can't just have a set of fucking rules that say, oh, it's just about some white people, but not all white people. Because then it's not fucking white privilege, is it, you fucking dickhead?
We can't have this rule because what?
I'm sorry I'm not being civil right now, but this is the type of argument and this type of fucking logic that drives me insane.
You are never being civil. There is nothing civil about defending a racist. There is nothing civil about defending someone who antagonizes black people, Muslims, and advocates for racial profiling.
You've just refuted your whole fucking argument. You keep harping on about white privilege and all that type of shit, and now you're disproving it in your own fucking video.
Again, how did I refute my own argument? You were the one who turned this into a discussion about white privilege.
Fucking hell. If you can't say without a doubt that every white person has this privilege that you say they have, it's not fucking white privilege, you moron.
I can use your logic to disprove privilege based on class and wealth. But that would be idiotic now, wouldn't it?
That's all it is. It's not an attempt to say that every white person is privileged.
There you go. It's not white privilege then, is it, you fucking dickhead? It's probably some other factors, like maybe wealth and class. Because there is privilege in that. And that's something that affects both white and non-white people.
If you can't prove that every rich person is in a privileged position to every poor person, then you can't say it. And saying it without proving it is fucking classist.
Because believe it or not, there are advantaged non-white people also in the fucking world, and indeed in the United States. You've only got to look at Barack fucking Obama for that. You fucking moron.
I am well aware of the fact that there are privileged non-whites. Class and wealth privilege do not cancel out white privilege. It just interacts with white privilege by adding on to the privilege you have or the lack of privilege you have in other areas. If I were a white homeless man, the fact that I am homeless and do not have class and wealth privilege does not change the fact that I belong to the dominant racial group, which grants me advantages that would not be given to me if I were a minority in similar circumstances.
Fucking hell. Seriously. Boy.
Compared to a black person, it's not saying that a black business owner is more privileged. I mean...
And that's the very reason why white privilege is a bullshit fucking argument.
White privilege is not a bullshit fucking argument. White privilege is an idea about general tendencies in certain areas of the social landscape. An idea that isn't disproven by assholes like you that don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Because there are black businessmen that are more privileged than fucking white homeless people. Why? Because we can see it on the fucking streets. It's self-fucking evident.
Dude, that doesn't mean that white privilege isn't real. That just means those specific blacks have class and wealth privilege.
For fuck's sake, this is why I get so angry when people bring up white privilege.
Your anger is a little one-sided, bud. I have 1,001 reasons to be angry at you, yet you do not see me going apeshit in most of the video.
Fuck me.
Less privileged than a white homeless man. That's not what it is at all.
Fucking hell. You're saying white privilege. You're using a generalization. You're using a skin colour. You're saying, oh, it's white privilege. It's because you've got white skin that you're privileged. That affects every fucking white person, you fucking moron.
I'm not using skin color. I'm not saying, is white privilege. The key here is the social group. Being part of the dominant and most advantaged group in the U.S. brings benefits. Whether it's your likelihood of being born poor, your likelihood of being profiled for drugs, and your likelihood of being discriminated against in housing markets. White privilege is about the advantages given by being part of the social group. Not everyone who is part of this group is going to gain the benefits for being part of this group. This can be seen in places like high schools. Take, for example, your typical high school jock group or cheerleader clique. There are massive benefits that come from being part of this group. However, some who are part of this group are being used and mistreated. I doubt this is perfectly analogous, but you nonetheless get the point.
I'm sorry I'm getting angry, but at this point in the video, it just seems you're a fucking dumbass. You really are. And it's no wonder you're a fan of Kevin Logan, because he's exactly the fucking same. He's a moron. And you people project this shit all the fucking time. You accuse me of fabricating shit when you're the biggest fucking fabricator out there. It's bullshit. Your whole fucking bullshit video is based on a straw man fucking argument that's been disproved. White privilege is bullshit.
Furthermore, white privilege has not been disproven. Tell this to a sociologist who studies race relations for a living, and they will laugh in your face.
Fucking hell.
And, later you cited the Kelly Thomas case as proof that white privilege isn't a thing. That's, again, another example of the fallacy that I was talking about earlier, using specific examples to disprove general trends.
Fuck me, you are dumb. You are seriously fucking retarded.
I feel the same way, buddy.
Don't you realise, right? I used Kelly Thomas an example of why white privilege is a bullshit argument. Because when you say white privilege, you're saying that everybody has this privilege based on their skin colour. And the case of Kelly Thomas disproves that, because he clearly wasn't privileged because of his skin colour, was he? How is that a fucking fallacy?
Again, how would he have been treated if he was black? Ask yourself this question, Vindicator.
It's a fucking point disproving your fucking assertion of white privilege.
It disproves nothing. Dream on.
It's not a generalisation. It's a counter-argument to what you're saying. This bullshit of white privilege. Fucking hell.
And, I personally do feel that the Kelly Thomas case is one of the most heartbreaking cases when it comes to police brutality.
Finally, we agree on something then.
But you are using it in the wrong way.
How am I using it in the wrong way?
You are using it against the concept of white privilege, instead of using it to prove class-based discrimination. The latter is more productive than the former.
I'm using the Kelly Thomas case as a way of disproving your assertion of white privilege. Because you made the assertion that white privilege is a thing. And then you go on to say, oh, well, it's not all white people. Then how can it be white privilege if not all white people have the fucking privilege? Fucking hell. Is it that fucking unobtainable for you to realise what you're actually fucking saying?
It can be said because whites are a group. Groups are never uniform in traits, but information about groups is necessary when trying to better a society. You can use either general information or quantitative information, or just qualitative information, whichever you prefer.
The Kelly Thomas case proves that white privilege does not exist. Because if he was white privileged, there's no way he would have got beaten to death on the fucking street, would he? Because his white skin would have protected him. Quite evidently, it fucking didn't, did it?
Yes, because he was poor and mentally damaged at the time of this event. If you add the fact that he was low class, impoverished, and suffered from a mental disability, the fact that he was beaten to death is not surprising. Now, if he was black, his treatment would likely have been even worse. America would be demonizing him, and America would be excusing this event.
And for your assertion of white privilege to be a thing, every white person needs to have it, as I said before, which clearly isn't the case. So it's not a fallacy, because it's disproving your assertion. Fuck.
You are using it to deny the experiences of minorities.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are. You have literally used these counter-examples to disprove the idea of systematic discrimination. And you have used them to disprove the idea that discrimination is not an epidemic. What do you propose? I call these trends, if not white privilege. Would you feel better if I called it something else?
I'm not at all. I'm using it to expose your fucking racism. I'm using it to expose your fucking racism.
Well, isn't that very interesting? Did you see how he just positioned himself? This guy says, now I was engaging with people who I am about to label racists. Therefore, use your deductive powers to realize that I'm not a racist. How could I be a racist when I'm accusing somebody else of being a racist? Did you see how he just did that? So when you get a bloated land animal like this, accusing other people of being racist out of sheer panic, a paralyzing conniption of guilt and political correctness, he will lash out and say, you're a racist. To which somebody who is not a racist will reply, but I'm not a racist. To which he will reply, aha, just what a racist would say. Great setup, bro. Nobody sees what you're doing here.
You are using it to expose my fucking racism? Okay. What if I told you that you are literally trying to argue that Devin isn't a racist when he clearly is? Not only are you defending a racist, but you are trying to disprove systematic discrimination. And you are trying to argue that white privilege isn't real just because you think it's racist. Meanwhile, in America, a lot of black people are being treated differently than whites just because they are black. And all you can think about is how racist you think the idea of white privilege is. Not only are you arguing against white privilege, but you are arguing in favor of white guilt. This is discriminatory behavior. If anyone is racist, it's you. You are the most selfish person I have ever come across.
That's what it's doing, and you don't fucking like it.
Actually, I couldn't care less about your accusations of racism. I have proven that you are a monster. You are just one in a long line of selfish assholes on YouTube who come in defense of the majority, who come in defense of the privileged. I couldn't care less what a know-nothing piece of shit like you thinks.
I'm not ignoring the plight of minorities. I'm fully aware that minorities have it fucking rough.
Yeah, only because it's obvious. You are denying that the discrimination is an epidemic. So yes, you are denying the experiences.
So don't come that one.
When it is, not is, but can and should be used to prove discrimination on the basis of class and to prove the militarization of the police.
Did everybody just hear that, what he just said there? It's used to prove the discrimination of class, which is probably the fucking factor. You fucking moron. Wealth and class are the privilege. And that can apply to anybody, any race on this planet, especially in the United States. The big issue is wealth and class. That's what the issue is, not race. That's what the issue is, not race. Because there are thousands of fucking white homeless people littering the fucking streets. You only have to go to London. There are white people on the streets with with non-whites on the streets. That's the factor. That's what disproves your fucking notion of white fucking privilege.
Race is also a factor in society. How is this a rebuttal to anything?
And you quite dishonestly say, oh, well, it's not about all white people. That's the dishonest thing.
No, it's not the dishonest thing. Because my statement was general. General statements are not absolute statements.
When you say white privilege, you're talking about all fucking white people. Because you don't make the distinction.
When I am talking about white privilege, I'm talking about trends and not absolutes. Only you have trouble understanding this.
Fucking hell, you don't realise that.
Force. It's basically an example of class-based discrimination.
Exactly. Finally, the penny drops. It's about class, not necessarily about fucking race.
Yes, the Kelly Thomas case wasn't about race. It was about wealth and class. So what?
Not a example that disproves white privilege.
It does disprove white fucking privilege. Fucking hell. Are you this dumb? Really? Seriously, are you this fucking dumb?
The same logic should apply to white guilt then, if you really believe this shit.
You've already said it yourself. That, it doesn't apply to all white people, this white privilege. Therefore, it's not white privilege, is it? Because not all white people have it.
The problem is not that this guy was treated with, a special privilege. The problem is that people who are black are often treated unfairly, and that's the problem that we need to focus on.
Fuck's sake.
So, yeah.
So what can we get from this video? So Kevin Logan, he tries by dishonest means, as well as Jaclyn Glenn, they try by dishonest means to prove that there is this white privilege that white people have when being arrested by the police, which has been proven to be bullshit, because in order to say that a particular race has privilege because of their skin colour, you have to prove that this is the case, that every single white fucking person on this planet has privilege based on their skin colour. If you can't prove that, if you can't say that every single white person has privilege based on their skin colour, then you can't say it. And actually saying that without proving it is fucking racist. It's as simple as that. It really is. This is Vindicator, signing off.
Okay, let's examine that logic for a second. You are saying that in order for white privilege to be proven, you have to prove that every white person is in a privileged position to every black person. This is absurd.
Why is that absurd? Why is that absurd? Because that's the basis of your fucking assertion, that every white person has this white privilege. But because you're basing it on skin colour.
It's not the basis of my assertion. You know this. Quit with the straw man.
It's not absurd. This is your argument. Your argument is absurd. Saying that every white person has privilege compared to a non-white person. Notice how I'm saying non-white person.
Logic that you apply in very little to no other domains. Now, let's give an example. I'm going to use bluebirds. I can easily say that you can't prove that bluebirds have wings because you cannot examine or look at every bluebird. You see the problem here. I'm not sure if that's a fallacy.
Yes, it is a fallacy because we know that birds can fly, for starters. We don't know all white people have privilege based on their fucking skin colour. Fucking hell. Talk about false equivalency.
So you are saying that my analogy about bluebirds fails because we know that bluebirds can fly. First off, Vindicator, your rebuttal is just the same logic that I am arguing against in another form. Secondly, that's just factually incorrect. Not all birds can fly, and they are called flightless birds. Penguins are just one example. So what I am going to do is I'm going to pretend that you argued that in order for something to be classified as a bluebird, it has to have wings. According to this logic, if a bluebird mother has a baby with a birth defect, and that birth defect was that she was born without wings, then that bluebird just gave birth to a creature of another species. What if the bluebird's wings were amputated? Would it still be a bluebird? At the end of the day, your logic is flawed. Okay, let's pretend for a second that I actually agree with you that white privilege is racist and wrong because it assumes every single white person has privilege. Granted, that still will not erase the systemic discrimination that occurs on a societal level.
Again.
But it definitely should be, because that's insane That's insane logic.
No, insane logic is saying that white privilege exists, but not for all white people. That's insane logic, because that isn't fucking white privilege. That would suggest to me there are other factors in play. If these group of white people don't have this same privilege as these group of white people, maybe skin colour isn't the fucking factor. Maybe it's wealth or status or class that is the factor. And then that can be applied to any race, can't it? Not just fucking white people, which is why white privilege is a bullshit fucking argument.
That logic is silly for reasons I have expressed numerous times in the video. This has been proven over and over again in the literature. This is an empirical fact.
Alright, that's all of the important points that I felt needed to be addressed. Because otherwise it would have been tedious. So
it was fucking tedious to fucking listen to. It was a pile of steaming horse shit. It's similar to fucking hell.
How do you think I feel?
Seriously, you're the new infidel avenger. You really are. You've taken his place. It's true. You know, one door closes, another fucking door opens, and that's quite evident. You know, there's plenty of social justice warriors to replace the fucking idiots that are leaving, and you're a prime example of this.
Great. We should be replaced. That way YouTube isn't filled with only selfish monsters like you.
I hope you guys have, if you look at this video, that you leave this video having learned something.
Yes, you're an ignorant cunt. And you don't understand what a fallacy is. Or that the fact that white privilege is a bullshit argument. Fucking hell. This is Vindicator, signing off. It was fucking tedious to fucking listen to. It was a pile of steaming horse shit. It's similar to fucking hell.